Okay, peoples, this video is going to address the first part of the reading that I assigned to you. It'll be sections B1 through B4. What natural law is not, as well as the introduction. And what I'm going to say with regards to the introduction, I've already kind of addressed. It's probably best summarized by the last 4 lines that, I don't know, it's about 10 lines down on the top of page 185. In addition to the explicit divine laws put forward in Scripture, or the human laws that people make in order to regulate society, so the commandments, all the various laws you have to follow that lawmakers make, the Church believes there's also a natural law written into the hearts and minds of humans that reveals God's will, and we've talked about this before. Examples of this are, there's no specific scriptural commandment, there's no earthly commandment that says how you're supposed to eat. Okay? It's already there. It's founded in that concept of natural law. Okay. So that summarizes the introduction. We'll go over this a bit more on Monday. I want to look at the 4 things that describes natural law as not. So for whatever reason, the author of the book, instead of giving you a definition of natural law, the first thing he's going to do is tell you what it isn't. So the first thing is on page 186, you find natural law and the back to nature movement. Natural law is not the idea of going back to nature, that having everything natural is what it is that needs to be done. Like, for instance, you've heard about folks who say, well, you've got to remove all chemicals from everything. Okay, you can't have stuff that's not natural. You can't have chemicals in food. Well, all right, water is a chemical. H2O. Its actual chemical designation in that sense is dihydrogen monoxide. It's a chemical. Anytime you combine atoms and molecules, you end up with a chemical. So the on-the-face argument of, well, we have to go back to natural, we have to remove chemicals from everything, is ridiculous because there's literally chemicals in everything. All right. Then the next thing they say is, well, if it came from nature, it must be good. Oh, really? What about toadstools? They come from nature. Should you be eating those? Okay, they kill you. And finally, the other element of this back to nature movement is we should not be using man-made things. Okay? So, if my appendix bursts, I should not use surgery to get this addressed. Because what's going to happen if my appendix bursts and I don't get surgery? I'm going to die. We have the capacity to address my issue, so don't you think it ought to be done? So, yeah, just because surgery in and itself isn't and cutting into someone's abdomen is not natural, right? But nevertheless, that's a facility that we've got. We understand how it works. We can do it ultimately without harming the person, so it's something we should do. So remember, we were given dominion over nature. It's not that we're specifically supposed to do everything fully natural, but there are specific indications about some things we should be doing and should not be doing, but we can also alter nature to some extent to fit our, what are called exigencies. Okay, what are our particular needs? So, natural law is not the back to nature movement. Next, natural law sometimes gets used to promote, like we observe certain things in nature and we say, oh, well, because other animals do this, therefore it must be okay. To give an example of this, one argument in favor of homosexuality is lions have been observed to engage in homosexual behavior. Specifically, what you see is you end up with 2 lions with manes engage in sexual congress. That is homosexual activity, seemingly by its definition. So consequently, homosexuality occurs in nature, therefore it must be okay. Well, a couple of things you have to keep in mind. One, there's this notion that anecdote is not data. What that means is that if you have this one particular story that someone went through, or you observe that something went through, that then generalizes to everyone. I'll give you an example. Let's say for the first time I observe a student taking the SAT, okay, and they get a perfect score, all right? So I have a sample of 1, all right, and that person got a perfect score on the SAT, so then I can generalize by saying, oh man, the SAT must be really easy, okay? Everyone's going to get a perfect score. You can't make that claim based on one sample size. And that's kind of what we're doing with this example of the homosexual lions. So that's one possible problem with it. Second, and this is somewhat along the lines that individual cases make for bad generalizations. Okay? Just because you happen to see 2 lions doing this sort of thing, you can't turn around and state that all lions do this sort of thing. And it's fairly evident that most lions, if not virtually all of them, don't engage in this aberrant behavior. But here's a third reason, at least with regards to the lions. You can have what's called incorrect observation. And remember when I described the situation? We observed 2 lions with manes getting it on. Sorry to use the phrase. What if I told you that sometimes female lions have manes? Oops. Yeah, so at least in one of these instances that was blown up, it said, yeah, we've got 2 lions who are engaging in homosexual behavior. Oh, wait a minute. The receptor lion was actually a female lion that happened to have a mane. Now, most female lions do not have manes, but some of them do. And yet here we have this one instance where we said, okay, we've got 2 lions with manes getting it on. Homosexuality is okay. No, that was normal lion congress. Okay? We just misidentified a female and called her a male. But setting all that aside, here's a bigger problem. You can't... Just because you observed certain animals doing something in nature doesn't mean that that is what humans are supposed to be doing. Black widow spiders, after they mate, the female bites off the head of the male. Is that what humans are supposed to be doing? Okay, they had hamsters eat their young. Okay, dogs copulate and then they immediately abandon their mates. All right, there are all sorts of things that that animals do that you can observe in the animal kingdom. That doesn't mean that's what humans are supposed to be doing. Okay, because for instance, if we're only supposed to do what animals do, we're going to have no art. We're going to have no written communication. We're not going to have houses unless they're building termite mounds or beaver lodges. Okay, and we will have no clothing ever. There's no recorded incident of anything in the animal kingdom wearing clothes. We don't do. Also, you would cook nothing. You're either eating plant matter or you're eating meat, and you are eating meat raw. You don't ever cook. Ever. Now, is anyone actually going to say, we're not supposed to be cooking because it doesn't happen in the natural world? It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. The wheel doesn't occur naturally in the animal kingdom, and yet we rely on wheels all the time. I mean, you can come up with any number of different examples. Ultimately, just because you're observing it in nature doesn't necessarily mean that that's what's supposed to be happening with humanity. B3, if you're looking in the text, let's see, that was top of page 188. It's only natural for a person to, if they do such and so. Now, the basic reality of this is that if someone does something naturally, or even a large group of people do something naturally, then that must be okay. Remember the premise I talked about earlier, vox populi, vox humbug. Just because all the people do it doesn't mean it's necessarily true. Look at prohibition as an example. Just because the majority do it doesn't necessarily make it right. It would seem to be natural to overeat, right? I mean, that's what our instinct says. We're hungry, eat everything. And many of us do. But is that really naturally ideal to do so? Because we learn, eventually over time, that those who eat a great deal end up getting sick and actually shorten their lives, okay? But a lot of people overeat. Just because a lot of people do it doesn't necessarily make it an okay thing to do. Okay, and then finally with regards to B4, if something occurs in an involuntary sense, if someone is going through something and they have no control over it, they were born with it. That's what ultimately is being said there. And they're using homosexuality as an example. Then it has to be okay. All right. Now, the book then uses the description of alcoholism. There are people who are born prone to alcoholism. They should not be drinking. But by this argument, if it's an involuntary desire to drink and drink a great deal, they should be allowed to do it. And in the notes that you're going to see on Monday, I provide other examples. There's crippling anxiety. There's catatonia, hallucinations. People can be prone to this. People can be prone to violent behavior. Sorry, people can also be prone to pedophilia. So they have this involuntary desire. Does that make it okay? And the answer, I mean, obviously, like in the notion of pedophilia, it's absolutely not okay. But even then, let's look at catatonia. There are some people who are born with a tendency towards schizophrenia, and one of the symptoms of schizophrenia sometimes is catatonia. I'm going to demonstrate what catatonia can look like. Now, while this looks like something a lot of students do in class, we're talking about doing this potentially for hours at a time. I don't know if you're familiar with the band Pink Floyd, but their original lead singer, songwriter, lead guitarist was a guy by the name of Syd Barrett. He's the one that got them started in the 60s, and he was absolutely brilliant, but he was kind of unbalanced, and he got increasingly unbalanced to where he was showing signs of catatonia. And the catatonia would manifest by him going on stage and doing absolutely nothing for 3 hours, while the rest of the band tried to carry on the concert. Or perhaps Barrett might just strum one chord. Or another example is where he actually spent the entire concert slowly detuning his guitar. That's all he did. And there were periods of time where he would sit and stare into space for hours, sometimes even days at a time, being completely unresponsive. Now, he was born with a predisposition towards schizophrenia. Okay. And he would even say, leave me alone. I want to stare into space. But is this in his best interest? No, it's not. Just because someone is born with something that they have no control over, and in a sense then is natural, in the sense that they were born with it, does that mean it's tied into natural law? And the answer to that is no, it isn't. Okay? Don't confuse being born with a condition, having something you have an involuntary desire to do. You can't control it, subsequently means it's okay. All right. And that's going to be it for that. The next video will ultimately talk more about what natural law is. And that video is going to end up dropping a little bit later.